So the Iranian regime's deadly crackdown on protesters has left thousands dead across the country. Now, for an in-depth look at the situation, we're joined today by Dr. Lee Ji-soo, visiting researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies. Dr. Lee, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the details, how would you assess the current situation in Iran? What key issues have sparked these massive protests across the country?
Large-scale anti-government protests are continuing across Iran, and they have effectively escalated into a nationwide uprising. It has been almost 3 weeks since the protests broke out, and they now appear to be easing somewhat. The demonstrations were initially triggered by the collapse of Iran's currency, the rial, which has fallen to more than 1.4 million to the US dollar. Protesters argue that the country's economic crisis is the direct result of government policies. They accuse the Iranian leadership of neglecting its own citizens while channeling resources to the external allies such as Hamas and Hezbollah, and of mismanaging foreign policy in ways that have prolonged international sanctions. The situation was further aggravated by the collapse of Ayan, the bank, last October. The bank was known to be very pro-government. It is accused of engaging in widespread financial misconduct under the state protection, which deepened public anger and financial instability. Inflation has surpassed 40%, driving up the cost of basic food items such as meat and rice. As daily life has become increasingly difficult, public frustration has boiled over into protest. Crucially, demonstrators say this is no longer just about criticizing policy failure. They are calling for fundamental change to the system itself.
Right, and thousands of protesters are reported to have been killed by Iran's security forces. And videos that are trickling out despite the internet blackout in Iran show just how serious the situation actually is, and it's now raising the alarm over the brutal crackdown. How has the Iranian government response, has it done anything to ease the protests?
The Iranian government is responding to the protest with an extremely heavy-handed crackdown. The IRGC and special police units have been deployed to forcibly suppress demonstrators, and security forces have fired live ammunition at crowds. According to Western human rights organizations, as you said, the death toll is estimated to be in the thousands, with some groups warning that the number could be significantly higher. Tehran has sought to justify the crackdown by claiming that the protests are being orchestrated by the US and Israel. Because of the severity of the repression, the scale of demonstrations has declined in some cities, but public anger toward the government has only deepened due to the crackdown.
Right, the situation does seem pretty serious. And how might this situation in Iran affect the broader Middle East region?
There is growing concern that political instability in Iran could spill over into the wider Middle East. Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar are watching the situation with unease. They are worried that any attempt to destabilize the Iranian regime could disrupt global oil markets. The Strait of Hormuz, which lies between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, is a strategic choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes. Prolonged unrest in Iran could threaten security in the strait and raise the risk of broader energy disruptions. At the same time, Gulf governments seem to be concerned that the unrest in Iran could trigger political ripple effects at home. Actually, their relations with the current Iranian leadership are already strained, but they also recognize that if the regime were to collapse, it is entirely unclear what kind of government might emerge in its place. There is also deep anxiety that anti-regime protests in Iran could inspire similar movements among their own populations. As a result, Gulf states are closely monitoring the situation, mindful of both the regional security risks and the potential for domestic political contagion.
Right, and U.S. President Donald Trump has told Iranians that help is on the way, and European officials have reportedly said U.S. military intervention could come soon. How likely is this, and how might it change the situation if it does happen?
President Trump has warned that the United States will take very strong action if Iran executes detained protesters, but just about 2 days ago, he also suggested that the Iranian government is unlikely to carry out such executions. This indicates that an immediate U.S. intervention does not appear likely at this stage, so at the moment, what specific measures Washington may take against Tehran remains unclear. If military options were to be considered, they could include targeted strikes on regime-related facilities, but for now, no military tools seem more likely, such as cyber operations, the imposition of additional sanctions, and support for anti-regime groups. In fact, as the former report said, the U.S. Treasury Department has announced that it has already begun imposing sanctions on Iranian officials.
Right, and Dr. Lee, before I let you go, looking ahead, what do you think is going to happen next? Could the protests lead to a collapse of the Iranian regime, and what are the possible scenarios?
It seems that the Iranian regime is unlikely to collapse in the immediate term, in 1 or 2 days. The military and intelligence services remain loyal. There are no clear signs of elite defections, and although Iran is under severe strain, the state's financial status has not yet completely collapsed. But over the longer term, these protests pose a serious threat to the regime. This is not a movement driven by a single social group, but a nationwide expression of anger against the system as a whole. Authoritarian regimes rarely fall overnight. Usually they weaken and eventually collapse as repeated waves of unrest accumulate over time. Iran could follow a similar trajectory. So in the short term, the protests may appear to subside, but if public frustration continues to build, the regime's long-term survival cannot be taken for granted.
I see. I guess we'll have to see how that goes. All right, Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your time and insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.